Hello, Year 12, and welcome to the second lesson of the Philosophy of Religion unit. So, last time we looked at the philosophy of Plato, and this week we're looking at Aristotle. So, what we need to know is Aristotle's method, the difference of Plato, the four causes, and the prime mover. So, we're going to start today's lesson by talking a bit about last week's lesson. So, we'll be looking at Plato and then really exploring some of the differences between the two. Okay, so this is what we looked at last time. So we said that Socrates taught Plato and Plato taught Aristotle. So Aristotle is a student of Plato. So he was brought up in the academy in Greece, being tutored by Plato and being taught his ideas on reason, immortality of the soul, and the doctrine of the forms. So Aristotle was the student of Plato. So both Plato and Aristotle begin, as we looked at last week, with this idea that the world is always changing. It's always in flux, and this is the world of the senses. So things never remain the same for long. So what we have here is an apple rotting. What we have here is a human getting older. Things are always moving and becoming. That means they're changing from what they are to something else. Now we understand Plato's understanding of change because he says change is because this world is a poor reflection of a better world. So changing apples, for example, are in the world of appearances. And this is an imperfect world where things are imperfectly reflecting the eternal, real realm of the forms. Aristotle doesn't agree. Aristotle rejects the idea that there are two worlds. Aristotle rejects the idea of the forms. So for Aristotle, there is only one world, the physical world that's available to the senses. So if we remember, this is the world that Plato said wasn't really real. But for Aristotle, this is the only world. This is the only thing that is real. So Aristotle is doing something quite controversial here. He's breaking away completely from Plato, from his teacher. So Aristotle says there is no metaphysical realm that is more real than the world we live in. The key to knowledge is in the physical world around us and is gained through the use of our senses. So this is the complete opposite of Plato. So Plato says that the realm of the forms is the only thing that's real, and Aristotle says there's no such thing as the realm of the forms. So there's nothing to be gained from a dualist approach. Remember, dividing the world from the material, visible, and the immaterial, intelligible, the world of the forms. There's nothing to be gained from doing this. So ideas have no real substance until they are related to things in the material world. So Aristotle still believes that things follow a structure and they have a form that's underpinning them, but this form exists inside of the object, in the material world, not in some other mysterious world of the forms. So let's look at Plato versus Aristotle's method. So Plato's method, he says the world of the senses is unreal. Knowledge can therefore only come through rational a priori thought, accessing innate ideas that are being recollected from a previous existence. So remembering innate truths. Aristotle's method, the world of the senses is real. Knowledge can only come from observation of this world, and we discover through observation. So Plato is much more a priori, and Aristotle is much more a posteriori. So I made a mistake in the last lesson. I said that this was Michelangelo. It wasn't. The painting's by Raphael. So we go back to the painting. We can see this difference in the figures of Plato and Aristotle. So I want you to look at their hands and their feet. Okay, you might want to pause the video and tell me what Raphael, the artist, is trying to say about Plato and Aristotle's differences. Okay, so Plato's hand is pointing. He's saying this world isn't real. It's the world of the forms, the metaphysical realm. Plato's feet aren't firmly on the ground, suggesting he's not really concerned with this world. This world isn't really that real. He's almost floating up to something else. Aristotle's hand facing the material physical realm. So he says, no, this world is the only world that's real. And his feet are firmly on the ground. He's in touch with the material world of experience, not the immaterial world of reason. So complete opposites. So we said that Plato was a rationalist, relying on reason. Aristotle is an empiricist. This is the belief that sense experience is the primary way to gain knowledge. You gain knowledge through looking at this world, not through pure reflection and thought. So from this, Aristotle founds, and I mean that he begins some of the very first biological studies and psychological studies and studies of the universe and studies of the weather and studies of the world. He was a philosopher, but he was also very much a botanist, somebody who explored nature. And this is in line with his philosophy. So he believes that this world, if we observe it, we can see structures and we can learn something about it. So it's a desire to understand. So he wanted to see if there were universal laws which governed natural processes. Okay, so here are two terms that are going to be useful for our study of Aristotle. So we have potentiality and actuality. So just think of potential and actual. If you've got potential, that means you've got something that's possible, not actual. Actual is when you actually have the fulfillment of that possibility. So potentiality is any possibility a thing is said to have. Actuality is the fulfillment of that possibility. So Aristotle looks at the world and he sees that the world is always changing. And remember, Plato thinks this as well. Plato thinks the world is always changing, but for Plato, it's because the world is a constant poor reflection of eternal forms. Each of these apples is somehow trying to be the form, but it's not succeeding, and it never will. For Aristotle, the forms actually exist inside the object, inside the object. And the whole world is moving from potential to actual, and it's trying to fulfill its form. And the form is inside of it. So this might seem a bit confusing, but let's just go through this with a few examples. So potentiality into actuality, potential thing into actual thing. Right, so an acorn, you can think about this, is a potential oak tree. Now it's not an oak tree yet, but inside the acorn is the idea of an oak tree, or the form of an oak tree. That's inside of the material, inside the matter. Okay, so the acorn will, if given the correct nurturing, turn into an oak tree. Potential oak tree, actual oak tree. Okay, bits of wood, this is a potential table. If you put it together, it becomes an actual table. So moving from potentiality to actuality. This is sperm meeting an egg. This is a potential human being. It's not a human being yet, but if it's given the correct nurturing, it will become an actual human being. And finally, there's a potential successful student. That's what you are. You're a potential successful student. You're not an actual successful student yet. If you nurture and correctly fulfill your potential, then you will achieve this actual. So everything in nature is moving, and it's moving to try and fulfill its form. And unlike Plato, the forms just exist within the object itself. So the form of oak tree is already in the acorn. The form of the table is already kind of there in the wood or in the plan or in the design of the table designer. Okay, the form of a human is already sort of there in potentiality in the sperm and the egg. And the form of the actual successful student is there in potential before. Okay, importantly, things don't have to fulfill their actuality. Sometimes that it doesn't happen. Sometimes an acorn doesn't grow, or a table doesn't get built, or a woman has an abortion, or you don't work hard enough and you don't get an A. So Aristotle calls these the four causes, and the four causes explains how things move from potential to actual. So if you follow all four of the causes, then you should successfully navigate the move from potential to actual. And this exists for man-made objects, but it also exists for natural objects as well. So why does the desk exist? What is its cause? Well, Aristotle says there are four ways that we can understand causation. So just pause the video and think to yourself instinctively, how would you answer this question? If someone said, what caused the desk? What would you say? Okay, well, there's a few different things we could say. It's caused by the wood and metal. Without the wood and metal, it wouldn't be a table, so it's caused by that. But wood and metal by itself wouldn't be a table. Wood and metal could be a chair. So we also need the person who made it, who actually turned the metal and the wood and nailed it together into a table. We also need that the plan that it's made according to. Okay, so the design or the structure that it's made in line with. And then finally, we also have this. It's caused by you needing to sit and work. Now, all four of these causes are important. Without any one of them, you wouldn't have a table. So if you didn't have wood and metal, there wouldn't be a table. If you didn't have the person turning the wood and the metal into a table, there wouldn't be a table. If you didn't have the plan, then it wouldn't be a table. And most importantly, if you didn't have the desire or the need to sit and work somewhere, there wouldn't be a table. So which one is the right cause? Well, that's a bit of a silly question because they all are. It's four causes. So Aristotle says we can understand how things are moving in the world around us through the four causes, moving from potentiality to actuality. Okay, these four causes explain how the table goes from potential table to actual table. So this is a Greek word called aetion, and this means cause. Okay, so to explain what something is like or what led to its existence. So we've looked at these already, but Aristotle says there are four causes. Okay, so let's look at the four causes of a biological substance. So let's look at a rat. Okay, it could be a human, it could be a cow, it could be a tree, it could be anything. Let's look at a rat. So there are four causes. So first of all, Aristotle says we have the material cause. That's something that the rat is actually made from. So various kinds of matter out of which it's formed, for example, skeleton, blood, DNA, It would be carbon, wouldn't it, if you were a biologist? Okay, but without that, you don't have a rat. But that's not enough alone to make a rat. Just having blood or carbon or water or whatever it is that a material uh, rat is made from, you wouldn't necessarily have a rat. You could also have a human that's made of the same thing. A cow is made of the same thing. So the second cause is needed as well. This is the formal cause. So the matter needs to be put into a form or a structure. So this is the shape or form that something has, which allows it to be identified as that which it is. The formal cause of the rat, it's a small round thing with a long tail. I would say it's the DNA personally. That's the structure of the rat's body, isn't it? Okay. Now this by itself wouldn't be enough though. You also need mummy and daddy rat. So this is the efficient cause. So the efficient cause is what actually brings the matter into the form, actually physically produces the object. So this is the name given to the activity that makes something happen. So the efficient cause of the rat is the sexual activity of the parents. This is the actualizing of potential. So far the material and the formal are just potential rats. Through efficient cause, in this case sex, in the table's case it would be the person actually banging the wood into the metal, or with the nails. This is actualizing potential. The sperm and egg of mummy and daddy rat has the potential to become a baby rat, but only as a result of sexual intercourse. The efficient cause is what brings about change. And finally, we have the last and the most important cause. This is the final cause. This is the purpose or telos. This is the reason that the thing exists, the purpose for which it exists. The final cause of the rat, then, the reason it exists, arguably, is to forage for food, make nests, or maybe just to make more rats. Now, this is the most controversial cause, because particularly in modern science, we only really accept these three. Teleology or telos is quite an unpopular idea, very popular in ancient times and very popular in scholastic or medieval times, but today not so much, and that's really since Charles Darwin. The theory of evolution seemed to demonstrate that things or objects don't really have an inbuilt purpose. So what's the purpose of a human? What's the purpose of a tree? Well, Aristotle thought he could say, but today we probably say no. Now it's easier to say that there's a purpose of man-made objects though, and that's because we give it its purpose. So the purpose of the table is to be sat at. Aristotle says that the final cause sort of governs all of the other causes. For example, if you wished to sit at the table, but you were a child, so you wish the child to sit at the table, that's its purpose, isn't it? Its purpose is a primary school table. And that's going to change everything. You might not want to make it out of metal because you might think it's too hard, so it might change the material cause. Okay, you might not want to make it out of nails because you might think it's too scratchy, so it changes material cause, it changes the efficient cause, how it's made. It could also change the plan, obviously, as well. So the rat, for example, if its final cause was to fly, then its formal cause would be very different. So final cause is the most important cause for Aristotle because it defines something's essence, what it really is, what it really should be doing. Okay, and Aristotle says something can only be good if it fulfills its telos. And it sounds quite complex, but it's really not. It's really not. Let's look at it now. We'll look at it in a second, sorry. Let's just go through the four causes first of all. So please pause the video. We've done desk. Can you try and just identify the four causes? What would Aristotle say the four causes for an apple tree and an iPhone? The desk material cause is the wood, the metal, the nails. The formal cause is the design. The efficient cause is the carpenter, and the final cause is be sat at and worked at. Okay, so pause the video now. Okay, so the apple tree, material cause, we might say carbon dioxide, carbon, water, etc. Formal cause, its structure, we might say bark, trunk, bushy leaves, we might even say DNA. The efficient cause, well, this is going to be water, light, and nutrients, what actually turns the seed into the tree. And finally, the final cause, well, this is to produce apples, that's its purpose. Okay, the iPhone, material cause can be metal and plastic, silicon, for example. The formal cause will be rectangular shape, touchscreen, the plan, the design, the blueprint of the phone. The efficient cause will be people in the factory actually putting it together. And finally, the final cause is to make calls and texts or go on the internet, whatever you use a phone for. Okay, so what makes a desk good? Well, Aristotle says it's telos. If it fulfills its telos. That's very simple. A table's purpose is to be sat at. That's its final cause. So telos and final cause are pretty much the same. Okay? So its telos is to be sat at. That's when it becomes good. When does an apple tree become good? When it fulfills its telos. Well, what's its telos? To produce apples. So a good apple tree is one that produces apples because it's fulfilling its purpose. What makes an iPhone good? When it fulfills its purpose, when it makes calls, sends texts, when it fulfills its purpose. Now, is this a good desk? The answer is no. It's no longer a good desk because it's not fulfilling its telos. If you sat at that, you wouldn't be able to lean on it. It would fall into you. Is this a good apple tree? Well, no, it's not fulfilling its telos because it's not growing apples. So it hasn't fulfilled its potential. It hasn't actualized its potential, this apple tree. It hasn't successfully followed the four causes because it hasn't fulfilled its final cause. Is this a good iPhone? Well, no, it's not fulfilling its telos. It's a broken iPhone. So four causes. This is the way of explaining why something exists and whether or not it is good. Okay, so which is the most important of the four causes? Well, Aristotle would say the final, because the final defines something's natural law. And we looked at Aristotle when we looked at the natural law units in our ethics paper. And natural law was essentially Aristotle, but Aristotle read, sorry, it was Aquinas, apologies, but Aquinas read Aristotle and agreed with this idea that all things in nature have a natural law, okay, a natural telos or goal. So this comes from Aristotle and the four causes. So if we want to see a seed, or we want it to grow, sorry, we plant it in soil. We fertilize it and water it and expose it to sunlight. Final cause, the telos, this is what should happen if we do the right things. For example, the seed will grow, provided we plant it in soil, fertilize it, water it, expose it to sunlight. As far as natural law is concerned, we plant seeds, water them, etc., because this is the way they grow and become plants. This is because there is something within the nature of the seed which responds to these conditions. It's the same with an apple tree, it's the same with a human, it's the same with anything. So the final cause guides everything's proper function. So this means that the final cause is what all the other causes are aiming for. Okay, you have metal in a table because it needs to be sturdy enough to be sat at. That's its final cause. Okay, a plant might be yellow because its final cause is to reproduce, and yellow helps it to attract bees. So a quick recap. Aristotle was a student of Plato, and although he respected his philosophy, he rejected his claim that there is a metaphysical realm above the physical. Instead, Aristotle believed that the primary way to gain knowledge is through the senses and experience. This makes Aristotle an empiricist, Aristotle rejected dualism and argued that observation of the physical world is crucial. Aristotle was fascinated by the question of cause, which Aristotle referred to as aetion. He argued that there are many different ways of explaining why something exists, which led him to recognize four causes that are inherent in all things. The first cause is the material cause, which refers to the matter out of which something is made, for example, and you can fill these in your own time. The second cause is the formal cause, which refers to the shape or form of something. The third is the efficient cause, which refers to the action that makes something happen. The efficient cause refers to potentiality becoming actuality. The fourth cause is the final cause, which is also referred to as the telos, which means the end. Arguably, this is the most important of the four causes because the telos of something informs all the other causes and guides its proper function. So, Aristotle also said that there were four causes for humans. So, what's the cause? Material, carbon, formal, DNA, human shape. Efficient, well, that's mum and dad. Final, well, what's the purpose of a human life then? Aristotle suggests that human beings have a number of activities, each of which depends on the preceding one. So growing, reproducing, sensing, feeling emotions, thinking, and choosing. So you can't choose without thinking, you can't think without having emotions, you can't have emotions without sensing, you can't sense without reproducing, you can't reproduce without growing. The ultimate end or purpose of human life really is the use of reason. This is what makes us different from animals. This is quite similar to Kant's ethics. Okay, so his view that an action is judged right or wrong insofar as it leads towards or away from the good end which everyone seeks. So this is where Aristotle's ethics comes in. Aristotle says that good and bad behavior is what allows you to fulfill your telos. So this is very similar to natural law, slightly different, but very similar. Okay, the ultimate purpose of human life is called eudaimonia. I'm going to look at that in a second. So it is the extent to which an action helps you attain your good end that indicates whether the act is good. So good and bad equals how well you are fulfilling your telos or your function. For humans, this is using reason. So there's an inner principle inside of all living things. So there could be an inner principle inside a tree, which allows it to grow fruit. The inner principle within humans is reason. So the human ability to reason is the driving force of human development and action. For instance, the ability to reflect on our own behavior and surroundings and change them in light of our thoughts about them is essentially what separates us from animals. So choosing to cook a healthy meal instead of having a hamburger through reason, that's what makes you human. So according to Aristotle's philosophy, something was good if it fulfilled its telos for which it was created. We could also see, look, when you make dinner, a good knife is one that cuts, a good burger is one that's tasty. So to establish the human telos, we use reason. Okay, and in ethical or moral life, we do this by several small steps. So in natural law, we call these primary and secondary precepts. But for Aristotle, he calls them ultimate and subordinate ends. And the ultimate end is eudaimonia. But in order to get there, we need to fulfill some basic things. So subordinate end is a goal or end that is sought because it contributes to an ultimate goal or end. So what's the ultimate end or telos of this class? You might want to pause the video and think about that to yourself. Okay, well the answer to that should be get an A. So what subordinate end do you need to achieve first? Well, you need to, first of all, get on the bus. Secondly, attend class. Third, sleep well. Fourth, have a good dinner. Work hard. There's loads of different things that are ends because they allow you to move from potential to actual. So Aristotle said that there is an ultimate end to human life. And you might argue it's to be successful. So a subordinate end to that might be to go to school. But before you go to school, you have to get on the bus. Before you get on the bus, you have to set an alarm. Before you set an alarm, you need to move your hand. So it goes backwards and backwards and backwards. So subordinate ends help us achieve our ultimate end, which is our telos. Okay, so a squirrel, telos, we might say to live and reproduce. Subordinate end, bury nuts. Woodpecker, to live and reproduce. Subordinate end, peck wood. It does it through different manner. Fish, to live and reproduce. Subordinate end, to swim. Apple tree, telos, to produce apples. Subordinate end, grow tall so we get sunlight. A car, ultimate end, to transport people. Subordinate end, to have working brakes. A chair, to allow humans to sit. Subordinate end, to have tight screws and bolts. A human, the ultimate end is to thrive. This is called eudaimonia, which means good spirit. And this is very difficult to translate. For Aristotle, this just means flourishing in every aspect of life, socially, through reason, intellectually, personally, flourishing. And subordinate end might be to go to school. So we have ultimate ends and subordinate ends. And subordinate ends are essentially efficient causes. Okay, what actually brings about the process of living and reproducing is burying nuts, pecking wood, swimming, growing tall, etc. So why do we ultimately do all of these things? Why do we want money? Why do we want a good grade? Why do we want family? Well, the ultimate end is going to be happiness. And this is another definition of eudaimonia, which is happiness. Now, this isn't happiness in the utilitarian sense, so it doesn't mean pleasure. This is happiness in the Greek sense, which is sort of an abstract noun. What it means is the process of just living a good life. It's not something you feel in any one moment. It's a state of being, a good life. So, Aristotle goes on to say that it's difficult to establish what the ultimate good is. It's not as straightforward as maths, for example. And we have natural tendencies which help us make moral judgments. But he believed that it was a fulfilled life called eudaimonia, flourishing or happiness. Okay? So far we have looked at the difference between Plato and Aristotle. We have looked at the idea of potentiality and actuality. We've looked at Aristotle's empiricism. We've looked at the four causes. And we've looked a little bit at Aristotle's ethics as well. Then the last section of today's presentation, we're going to be looking at the prime mover. Okay, this is Aristotle's idea. So Aristotle realized that everything in the world is moving. And everything in the world is caused. If everything in the world is moving and is caused, then it must be caused by something that came before it. But that thing that came before it must be caused by something that came before that. And that must be caused by something that came before that. And that must be caused by something that came before that. And that must be caused by something that came before that. And he asked himself, well, what's the first cause? What caused everything? So Aristotle, studying the four causes, led him to realize that everything in the world can be explained according to these different causes. But what about the universe as a whole? Does the universe have a cause? What caused everything? Now, there's some big problems here. And lots of problems here which are very, very relevant to modern astrophysics, so modern ideas of the Big Bang, for example. Aristotle says that there's a beginning of time. If there is a beginning of time, maybe the universe has always existed, but if there's a beginning of time, what caused everything to happen? What started everything off? What was the first cause or the prime mover? Prime means the first mover. So Plato said about the material world that everything in the world is in a constant state of motion and change. And Aristotle agrees. But everything for Plato is sort of aiming to fulfill the forms. And from your reading, you'll understand that the world, according to Plato, was created by the demiurge, which is sort of a god, but not a proper god. Aristotle says, what's set about this change in motion? It can't have come from nowhere. So there's cause and effect, and every effect has a cause. So the dominoes falling over, caused by the person pushing the domino. Effect, a baby. Cause, sexual reproduction. The universe is an effect. What caused the universe? So this is the question that Aristotle is asking. And Aristotle thinks of various solutions. So one of them could be that the universe has always existed, it has no cause, but he doesn't like this. Another suggestion could be that it causes itself, but that's not possible. How can something cause itself? That means it has to exist before it existed in order to cause its own existence. So Aristotle arrives at this idea of a prime mover. Let's be really careful about what this is. It is God, but it's not the Christian God. And the reason it's not the Christian God is because Aristotle wasn't a Christian. So it's more of sort of a force or an energy, an eternal presence that's always been there. Nothing to do with love thy neighbor or the Bible, because it's before that. So in order to actualize potential, what must my relationship to it be? Well, let's look at that for a second. Before we look at that, which cause is God? Well, Aristotle's going to say the efficient cause. He's the person that gets everything going, that starts everything off. You could also say the final cause as well, because everything in the universe moves towards him through attraction. We'll look at that in a second. Okay, so in order to actualize potential, but all that means is in order to move something from sperm and egg to baby, or in order to get some dominoes falling, you have to be outside of the thing that you're having an effect on. Okay, that means you can't be a baby that causes the baby. You have to be outside. So cause and effect have to be separate to each other. So what this means is that God is the efficient cause of the universe. God is outside of the universe. And God actualized the potential. So there was a potential world, and then God actualized it. He created it in one moment. Now we can see how this has become incredibly popular for Christians, because in many regards, this is an explanation of Genesis 1. In the beginning, there was nothing, and then God created the heavens and the earth. The Spirit of God hung over the abyss. There was nothing at all. And then God said, let there be light. Now, Aristotle hadn't read Genesis, but his account seems to be so similar to it that it has been really attractive for Christians. There is a problem, though. You might have seen this already. If we're asking what is the cause of the universe, and we say, well, it's God, well, then we can just ask, well, what caused God? Very tricky question. So what we can say then is that God is caused in a unique or special way. So before something can move, there must first be. We've been through this, but let's just talk about this briefly again. There must be something else that's moving. We can ask ourselves, well, what moved this mover? And what moved this mover? And what moved this mover? So there must be an original unmoved mover that started all motion. However, our question was, well, what moved the mover? What caused the causer? And Aristotle is going to say that God is the first cause, the prime mover. There's no cause to God. God has always existed. It's outside of time, in fact. So, according to Aristotle, there must be an original unmoved mover that started all motion. However, this mover cannot have moved. It can't move. So I'm going to say that again. The mover can't move. Just pause the video and think about why that is. Okay, well, the answer is the prime mover cannot have been moved himself, because then there would be a question about, well, what moved the prime mover? And then there would be an infinite regress, because then you'd say, well, the prime mover was moved by the next motion and the next motion and the next motion, and then we don't have a prime mover. The prime mover has to be the first mover. So Aristotle didn't think there could be an infinite regress. Now this means that God is unmoving, because else something must have moved him. So if the mover moved, we'll be asking, well, what moved the mover? The prime mover therefore makes its first move as a final cause, not as an efficient cause. And that's because efficient cause is a motion. Okay? For example, reproduction, for example, hammering nails into a table. Okay, those efficient causes require motion. The prime mover can't move, because if the prime mover moves, we've got to ask, well, what moved the prime mover? So the prime mover makes the world, or makes the first movement, without moving itself. So it makes its movement as a final cause, as a telos, as a purpose. Its purpose is to make everything move towards it. So it causes motion, but it does not move. How is this possible? How can you move something without moving yourself? So for example, how can I flick some dominoes over without moving my hand? Well, Aristotle uses an analogy, and he says it's a little bit like a cat. The milk moves the cat without moving. I'll say that again. The milk moves the cat without moving. And it does that not through efficient cause, not through anything physical, but through attraction. So the purpose of the milk is to be drunk by the cat. So it attracts. So this means that God makes movement in the universe without moving himself, because everything is attracted to him. So similarly, you could say the Topshop sale moves people without moving. Okay, the cat is moved by the milk. Gravity causes movement without moving. Wanting to get into bed moves you without moving. Netflix makes you move without moving. People move towards food without the food moving. So it's attraction. So the prime mover creates the worlds by making everything potential be attracted to him. So the prime mover is immaterial. He's not made of anything physical, because he has no material cause. He's perfect. His pure actuality with no potentiality, which means he doesn't have any potential to move, or potential to be anything other than that which he is. So if you think about it, an acorn has the potential to be an oak tree through motion, but God doesn't have the potential to do anything. God is pure actuality. He's purely what he is in himself and doesn't move. So the unmoved mover moves everything in the world without itself being moved. Everything in the world is drawn towards God's perfection and wants to imitate it. It's the ultimate attraction. So Aristotle recognized four causes that are universal and can be attributed to all things in the natural world, even humans. Aristotle recognized humans telos as eudaimonia, which means happiness or flourishing. Every action we perform is guided by our purpose. The ultimate aim of human life is to achieve eudaimonia. However, there are less important aims that we seek to achieve on a daily basis. These are known as subordinate ends or subordinate aims. For example, in order for us to get good A levels, we need to go to school. In order to do this, we need to get on the bus each day. These subordinate aims help us achieve other aims, which will eventually lead us to achieving our ultimate aim, or telos. Just as Plato had, Aristotle recognized that everything in the world is in a constant state of change and motion. Motion always has a cause. This caused Aristotle to question the cause of the world, and he particularly wanted to discover the efficient cause and final cause. Aristotle rejected the idea of an endless chain of cause and effect, which is known as infinite regress. Aristotle believes that the prime mover is a cause that actualizes the potential in everything. The prime mover could not have started the universe in motion with a movement himself, because this would have affected him and he is unaffected. I guess this is the interesting idea that if you move or cause something, then you are moving and you are being caused. Some sort of action reaction. If I move someone, if I push someone, their motion is sort of pushing back on me as well, and that can't happen with the prime mover. So instead, the prime mover causes motion by attracting things towards him. This is similar to the way a bowl of milk attracts a cat, because the milk does not move but still causes the cat to move towards it. The prime mover is the final cause of everything that exists in the universe. He cannot be the efficient cause, because the efficient cause is understood as the action that changes potentiality into actuality. The prime mover is incapable of doing the activity that brings something about. So, last thing we look at, what is this prime mover like? So now Aristotle has posited a prime mover who causes motion in all things, but who himself does not move. That means God is what? Well, number one, exists necessarily. That means God doesn't depend on anything else. And that's because he's not caused by anything else. God has a necessary existence. Okay, so God does not depend on anything else for his existence. If he did, he'd be capable of change, because he would be forming in the process of motion. And also, he might not exist, because anything that exists only depends on the existence of something else if it's not a necessary existence. So the flower depends on the water, human being depends on nutrients. God doesn't depend on anything. He has no potential. He exists independently of everything. So we have potentiality here. We have a potential tree. We have a potential apple tree. So this is a potential apple tree, this is potential apple tree, this is actual apple tree. It changes. This is potential table, this is potential table, this is actual table. And the development of this follows the four causes. So something reaches a state of actuality when it's achieved its telos. God has no potential. Because if he had potential, he would at some point be less than God. And God can't be less than God. So God is always himself and never changes. He's pure actuality. So God must exist independently or necessarily of the world. So God must be eternal. He has no potential. He's not subject to change. He cannot cease to exist. That's change, isn't it? That's potential non-existence. So because he does exist, this must mean that he has always existed as well. He's the first cause. Nothing made him. He must be perfectly good. Evil is to lack goodness. God cannot be lacking because God is pure actuality. So actuality suggests that a thing possesses everything it should possess. Therefore, God must be perfectly good. Be immaterial. All matter in the world can be acted upon and is therefore subject to change. So God cannot be made of matter. Therefore, God is immaterial. If God is immaterial, then he cannot be capable of any physical activity. So he must be a purely spiritual thinking being. But God cannot think about anything that could result in change. God therefore must only be thinking about his own perfect nature. So God is just thinking about himself. He can't think about anything that's changing, because then he would be changing, because his thoughts would be changing. So this idea of God for Aristotle is very strange, and it's not particularly Christian. This is a God who doesn't really get involved in the world. He creates it, but he doesn't get involved. He doesn't think about us, or he doesn't think about his world. He just thinks about himself. He's an idea thinking itself. And he's the final cause of the world as well. Not only as the origin of everything, but also as the purpose of everything. Everything is attracted towards him. He's the final cause. So not only as the origin of everything, but also as the purpose of everything. He's the final cause in terms of being the object of love and desire in the world. He's transcendent and also the ultimate reason for everything. So necessary, eternal, perfectly good, immaterial, and final. So Aristotle claims that the prime mover is what sets the universe in motion. Must exist necessarily because God is wholly simple. And this means he's just pure actuality. He can't be anything other than that which he is. Because if he was, then he'd have the potential to change, and change equals imperfection. So God is changeless, unrestricted by time and space, cannot suffer, cannot change his mind. So this is the idea that something that's complete in itself is actually simple. Simple idea. And these ideas were adopted by Christianity. The big AO2 criticism is you could say, well, the God of the Old Testament doesn't seem like this. The God of the Old Testament gets angry and changes and seems to not know things and seems to be affected by the world. Okay, so evaluating Aristotle's philosophy. So let's think about a theory built upon empiricism, the laws of cause and effect. Can we trust the senses? Well, Plato would disagree. Plato would say that Aristotle's system is flawed from the beginning because the senses can't be trusted. So think about the cave. Rejection of Plato's belief in metaphysical world. Well, is this fair? Is this just? One of the reasons that Aristotle says that Plato's theory of the forms is wrong is because how could you have a form of everything? That would mean there's a form of imperfect things, such as poo. Is there a perfect idea of poo? Now, is this a fair rejection? So that's something that we could ask. And this is sort of the biggest area of criticism. And this is the area of criticism, as I've said, that really developed in the last 300 or 400 years, really since the Enlightenment, but also since Charles Darwin, the theory of evolution. Does everything have a natural purpose or a telos? This isn't a very modern way of viewing the world. So really since the Enlightenment, in particular Newton, we have this idea that all of the world is just matter in motion. And it's moving in an unintelligent way. So it's moving with no purpose. There's no goal. Jupiter doesn't have a goal when it goes around the sun. It doesn't have an aim. So this is the view that viewing things in the universe as having purposes and goals and aims, it's sort of personifying the material world. There's no aim. The tree isn't trying to do anything. It's just following natural causes, following natural laws. Okay, so does everything have to have a telos? It could be that we've invented these teloses as well. And this gets quite interesting. So for example, what's the purpose of a rabbit's tail? You could argue the purpose of a rabbit's tail is it needs to be white so that the hunter has something to aim at. And that's a famous criticism by David Hume. He says, we could just invent purposes, couldn't we? The purpose of a tree is to be burnt, to make a fire. What's the purpose of a rat? The purpose of a rat is for me to step on it. Because the purposes could just be made up. Someone could just as easily say the purpose of human life is war and death. And this is the position really in the last 100 years that these three thinkers have really latched onto. So Jean-Paul Sartre, Richard Dawkins, and Bertrand Russell. So they all have the same kind of view, which is it makes no sense to talk about the purpose of the universe. So they're talking more widely here. It just exists. There's no reason or goal for anything. It's simply chance. And Sartre here on the left goes even further and says we invent purpose. Okay, so which one is more attractive, prime mover or infinite regress? We could just say there's been cause and effect going on forever, and there is no beginning to the world. The world is infinite. This is what Hindus believe. They believe that the world is infinitely old and it just goes through cycles of creation and destruction. Now, why might Christians actually oppose the God posited by Aristotle? Well, you could argue because this is a God who isn't very personal, who doesn't really love you or care or want anything. This doesn't seem like a particularly Christian God. Okay, so that concludes our lesson on Aristotle. We have an essay question that you're going to go through. I'm not going to read it out, so I'm going to hover over the paragraphs for 3 seconds on each so that you can pause it and read it in your own time. Okay, well, thank you very much, Year 12, and I'll see you next week.